Welcome to our audience from around the world. My name is Alan Terletto, here on behalf of Redis Labs. Today I have the distinct pleasure to speak with Chris Richardson. Chris is a deeply experienced software architect and entrepreneur. He's a Java champion, founder and CEO of Eventuate Inc., creator of Microservices.io, which I definitely recommend, author of multiple books, including the very popular Microservices Patterns, something we'll be diving into, conference speaker and thought leader in our space. So without further ado, welcome, Chris, and thank you for being a part of this year's Redis conference. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. You know, in these rather unusual times, it's nice to have some human contact, albeit virtual.
I could definitely understand that. I bet most of our audience, those with at least some microservice experience, have run across one of your books, maybe a blog, maybe a video. But in case they haven't put a face to the name, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah. So, I've been developing software for a long time. And it was funny, actually, my first paid job was back in 1982, the summer before college. That was using some pretty archaic technology. But, since then, I ended up doing Java starting in the late 90s, I guess, Spring Framework in the early 2000s, wrote the book Pojo's in Action. That came out in 2006. Then in 2007, I started playing around with Amazon EC2, back when everyone thought of Amazon as an online bookstore. And then that evolved into the original Cloud Foundry, a PaaS for deploying Java applications on Amazon EC2. Which was pretty exciting. And then for about the past 7 years, I've been pretty much focused on the microservice architecture. I used to say I travel the world working with clients, helping them adopt the microservice architecture. But obviously these days, there's not so much traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. So your journey didn't actually start with microservices, as many probably think, but you transitioned from Java to Spring Foundry and then over now to microservices. What's kept you inspired to stay as a thought leader in the field?
Well, I look back and I think a recurring theme has always been how to build software better. Way back, actually, 14, 15 years ago, I even had this slogan, build better software faster. And that was actually one of the motivations for Pojo's, in a way, simpler, more lightweight way of developing Java applications. But I think it sort of goes back way before that. And I don't know whether it's because when I started my professional career, I actually started off in the world of Common Lisp. So one of those ivory tower languages, incredibly sophisticated back in the mid 1980s, if you can believe that, right? And so that sort of was always giving me a sense of for a long time, this is how things should be done. And then I sort of transitioned to more mainstream languages, and this desire to do things better has just kind of stayed with me. So if anything, PaaS, Cloud Foundry, it's how do you deploy better, right? So Pojo's better software, Cloud Foundry deployment better. And then I just got interested in the microservice architecture because I was trying to figure out ways to do things better, and it solved some problems, and I just got interested in it.
Yeah, I could definitely see the parallels of kind of your experience and then microservices about deploying faster, better code. In case some of our viewers are new to microservices, do you think you could give us your viewpoint on what is driving a lot of this mass adoption of microservices architecture?
Well, I think there's, one big trend is, the business climate within which we operate, businesses operate is just becoming very fast-paced and very dynamic. There's always a risk of new competitors emerging out of nowhere, right? For instance, in the world of banking, to be a bank, you had to have physical buildings and vaults, right? And now, in a whole bunch of markets, it's pretty common to have online banks. So if you're, for example, an established bank, then suddenly overnight you could literally get 10 new competitors who are using technology in an attempt to disrupt your business. And so you have to move faster. And that's a huge driver. It's all about, it's sort of combining with the fact that software is eating the world, right? Products and services are powered by software, and it doesn't matter what industry you're in. And so software is central to your business. And so to be competitive, you have to master software delivery. And a big part of that is having an architecture that's loosely coupled so that teams can work. You can have loosely coupled teams that can deliver software rapidly, frequently, and reliably. And then it ties in with the DevOps. I mean, it's sort of a big part of this. I have this success triangle concept. You have an organization that's a network of loosely coupled teams that are doing DevOps, and then the architecture that they need to do those two things is actually, or quite often, certainly at scale, the microservice architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as we move into these now cloud environments where everything needs to be cloud native, loosely coupled, and things along those lines. So based on your experience, is there an inflection point where the major patterns you cover in your book, and you're going to be covering in the session here, go from a really nice to have to, I really wish I had that in place?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, one thing I always want to stress, right, is that, the microservice architecture is not a golden hammer, right? It should, in a sense, no architecture should be the default choice for your application. So, if you're saying always microservices, that's a mistake. And conversely, if you're, today it's really popular to have this sort of microservices backlash where you tweet something negative about microservices and say monolith forever, you're guaranteed to get hundreds of engagements, right? But the reality is both those positions of monolith always, microservices always are just wrong. The role of an architect is to actually understand the context within which they're trying to build software and pick the right architecture for their application.
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson, especially for younger developers. I find a lot of times people get really kind of fixated on a specific implementation style and really lose the concept of a pattern having to have applicability for really what what you're trying to achieve for the customer. Is that correct?
I mean, and interestingly, if you look at, we throw around the term pattern quite liberally, right? And to me, the classic definition of a pattern is that it's a reusable solution to a problem that occurs in a particular context. And so if the context changes, then perhaps the solution is different. And then also the other really key part of a pattern is when you write it up, not only do you describe the benefits, like this technology is awesome, which is kind of like often pretty much the end of the discussion, right? To, well, yes, it has those benefits, but here are the drawbacks. Plus, if you apply this pattern, here are the issues, here are the sub-problems that you actually have now created for yourself by applying this pattern. And here are some other patterns for how you solve it. So if you go to microservices.io, you will see exactly that, right? Yes, it's all about the microservice architecture, but it actually tells you what the drawbacks are, also what the issues are, and then provides the patterns for addressing those issues. And that's a much more objective way of kind of having a conversation about design choices, is to be explicit about the good and the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. That probably explains why anytime you speak with an architect, the answer to your question usually is it depends, and then they give you kind of the pros and cons, right?
Oh yeah, no, that's so true. I mean, it literally does depend.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are some pitfalls that developers and architects new to microservices commonly fall into from your experience?
Yeah, well, sort of one of the biggest challenges with the microservice architecture is getting the right service boundaries, because, in other sense, dividing your system up into the right sort of set of services, that's the essence of the microservice architecture. And it has real world consequences because you have issues around network latency, you have issues around data consistency, and you have issues of ease of change. Because for instance, if the kind of a very common pattern, anti-pattern, I should say, would be the distributed monolith, where yes, you've broken things up into services, and the whole point of that is to enable independent development and deployment, but you've done it in a way such that whenever you make a change, you end up having to update all or a large number of your services. So you're having to deploy everything in lockstep, at which point you've got a monolith that's made up of lots of pieces, which is like the worst of both worlds.
Right.
So that's one real problem. And then I think and also this is kind of a common cause of that problem, is people take the term microservices too literally. You hear the term micro and you think it must be small, right? And actually, if you look back, like on Twitter, 7 years ago, or 6 years ago, 100 lines of code, right? 2,000 lines, 2 weeks worth of work. Each REST endpoint, create an order, update an order, find an order, should be its own microservice, right? And it's like, no. Don't take it too literally in that regard. And, for me, a good starting point is to say the whole point of your architecture is to enable teams to be loosely coupled. And given that, you should just consider having one service per team, because that can be good enough, and only have more services per team if that actually solves a tangible problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great advice. So stick to componentization without a lot of interdependencies, focusing on that bounded context, especially really hard to do when you're starting off with that microservice but don't have 1,000 yet.
Yeah, I'd even stress it slightly differently. It's about teams, right? The small teams, 5 to 9 people. Your architecture is there to support in general, there are sort of technical considerations as well. But when we're talking about microservices, the primary driver is an architecture to support the teams, and so a service per team is all you need, and not the common anti-pattern is like a service per developer. I see that repeatedly. Or there are certain companies out there, if you Google them, they have 10 services per developer, and that's like, questionable.
Yeah. Stick to the 2 pizza rule, right?
Yeah.
So switching gears a bit, what's your experience with Redis? How long have you been using Redis?
Oh, I'm actually a big fan of Redis. I first got interested in it kind of so long ago, forgotten when, but I want to say, how long has Redis been around? Because has it been like 10 years or more? Mm-hmm. I feel like I discovered it way back, and then, obviously, like a lot of people, I started using it from a caching point of view. But because it really is sort of like a data structure server, you could represent the data in a cache in some super interesting ways, which ended up resulting in some great performance benefits. So I'm going to make up a number, and I have no idea whether this is true, but it's been 10 plus years. And then in the context, as the tutorial that I'm giving later today, or sort of, well, it's happening, right? It's just live, self-paced course. There's multiple roles for Redis in a microservice architecture. So one of those roles is to use Redis streams as the messaging fabric between your services. So that's one super interesting use case. And then there's a pattern for implementing queries that span multiple services in a microservice architecture called CQRS. And there, Redis is an excellent fit for a CQRS view. So it's basically a replica of the data designed to be easily queryable that's kept up to date using a sequence of events. And hey, Redis is good at that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, there's kind of this fundamental contradiction I see sometimes. There's a lot of blogs and content out there, right? Some of it talks about using Redis as a cache for your microservice, which makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, we talk about empowering the developer to choose the best possible database, right, for the unique SLAs and needs of your microservice. So where do you kind of fall in that debate of should I use an RDBMS and maybe put Redis as a cache, or should I just leverage Redis as a primary database for my microservice because it has those real-time SLAs?
I'm going to be an architect and say it depends. Right? No, it really does. I mean, so certainly one of the benefits of the microservice architecture is that it enables you to, rather than use a sort of one-size-fits-all technology stack for your entire application, for each service, you have the potential to pick the technology stack from a coding point of view, and pick the persistence technology as well. So obviously there's sort of issues around governance because you don't want to have every team picking an entirely different stack, right? But on the other hand, you have this potential. So yes, for the XYZ service, if a given database like Redis fits those requirements, then yeah, use it.
Yeah, definitely makes a lot of sense. So as you know, there's been a buzz around microservices architecture for quite a while now. You've brought up that there's starting to be this kind of cyclical behavior of monoliths are making their comeback. How do you balance all that, and where do you see as the future of microservices architectures?
Yeah, well, what's interesting is way back, I kind of want to say 2013, I gave a talk about patterns and microservices. And I actually used the Gartner hype cycle to sort of explain how technology is adopted and the concept that there's a lot of emotions and not a lack of objectivity a lot. And this is why patterns are a good thing. And yes, you're seeing that play out, right? Before it was microservices, everything. Yes, we'll have lots of little fine-grained microservices. And now people are realizing that, once again, the microservice architecture solves is a solution to a problem that occurs in a particular context. Plus, there's some issues around using it. So you have to use it in the right situation, and you have to use it right, use it appropriately. So there are, and if you use it in the wrong context or you misuse it, right? Sometimes that's great because it gives you a talk at a technology conference about, hey, we did microservices and it didn't work out. But, not naming names here, but, key part of the microservice architecture is that your services should be loosely coupled. And so if you build a tightly coupled microservices architecture, that's not going to work. So there's sort of, there's that learning period, right, about when and how to use it. And so now we're seeing the backlash. And then, people with a lot of followers can go monoliths forever. And that generates a ridiculous amount of engagement on social media. But so we're going through we're heading to the trough of disillusionment. And then, what comes after that? It's like the plateau of enlightenment, right? And so eventually we're going to end up on the plateau of enlightenment. Because, the technology is proven, right? Like on the one hand, and from a mainstream context, it's new, but Amazon migrated to what you could call a microservice architecture 2002, right? They were building a complex e-commerce application in a hyper-competitive environment. If you remember, there were other people selling books online and other things, right, way back then. They needed to move quickly, and that's why they adopted the microservice architecture, and that was 18 years ago, which is sort of the ancient history. So this technology is sort of like, it's not new. It's just taken a while to diffuse throughout the community, and given and actually have a name that's catchy, right? Because that then that gives you a concept. Once you have a name, that gives you a concept you can talk about. And then the marketing machines of tech companies kick in and to say how they participate within this new thing. It's just got to go through the standard maturation, I would say. I mean, one of the things I've always hoped to do with microservices patterns, actually, is just kind of short that and actually say, this is when you should use it, and this is how you use it, so that you can kind of skip the hype and then skip the disillusionment and just be enlightened. My goal is to help the software community to go down the path towards enlightenment as far as microservices are concerned.
That sounds like an excellent goal, very altruistic. And actually, I was going to say, that's a really great reason for those of you starting with microservices or maybe kind of into that journey to, check out Chris's sessions or some of his book or some of the webinars, really to skip some of those pain points and pitfalls you might jump into, because he's been there, he's done that, and he talks, I think it's fantastic content about some of the proven patterns that are out there. So Chris, can you give us some insight, kind of what's the next big project? What do you have on the horizon?
Well, the thing that's consuming a lot of my attention, I mean, there's sort of just this ongoing, sort of thoughts and efforts about distilling microservices architecture and design techniques into material that I can much more easily share with people. And because one of the challenges is that for the past few years, I've been at clients an insane amount. Sort of like, it's like I looked it up in the first 2 months of this year, I was like in 6 different countries, flew probably 30,000 miles, 18 different cities. So one benefit, if I can say that, of this current situation is I've had a lot of time to focus on other things. 2 months of not traveling, right? But at the same time, that's forced me to sort of kind of change my business model. So I'm very actively working on putting together self-paced virtual boot camps on the microservice architecture, so that as a replacement, at least temporarily, and then later on to augment any in-person training that I do. So I'm kind of consumed with content right now.
All right. Well, I don't know too much about enlightenment, but I believe it comes with a lot of focus and a lot of time. So if you're ever going to achieve that goal, maybe this was a great predicate for it. So switching gears a little bit again, quick lightning round just to make it fun as we wrap up here. Some quick Q&A here. For our Redis geeks out there, Star Wars or Star Trek?
That's so funny. The instant you say that, I think of that YouTube video where Darth Vader meets Captain Picard. It just makes me laugh. Though, I mean, I must admit, episode 4 of Star Wars, when it came out, was deeply moving. I love that movie, and it meant so much to me. But I'm very much a next generation Star Trek Next Generation person. I feel like Star Trek has a deeper philosophy.
Yeah.
I've been to Star Trek conventions.
All right.
Twice. And I would so love to meet Patrick Stewart.
Huh?
Really would.
Favorite microservices thought leader not named Chris Richardson?
Oh. I like Sam Newman, actually. He's a really good guy.
Excellent. Orchestration-based or choreography-based sagas?
It depends. You got to take you have to read up on that because it does depend.
And for the audience, if you're interested in what that is, definitely check out Chris's talk. In the CQRS pattern, do you prefer Redis on the command or the query side? I think I know where you're going to go with this. Oh, well,
undoubtedly. I mean, once again, it depends, but undoubtedly, using Redis on the query side is generally that's an easy decision. Whether on the command side that's more nuanced, right? And there's a lot of many more. It depends around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you check out CQRS pattern, I would definitely recommend learning a little bit about what we got going on with Redis gears and how potentially it can help you implement the CQRS pattern, especially if Redis is on the command side. What's the first restaurant you will visit once things get, we're back to normalcy? What have you been itching anywhere in the world? Go out there and eat that you can't.
Oh, yeah. That's just fascinating. There's so many places I want to go to, but one that really comes to mind is Gymkhana Indian restaurant in London. It is keema curry and their tandoori mixed grill is out of this world. It's just unbelievable. And the sad thing was that they actually had a fire June of last year. I haven't been able to go since. And then they reopened in February. I missed that by a week. And then, of course, COVID has happened. But they just started delivering takeout. I saw that on Instagram. So free
Excellent.
Plug for Gymkhana.
I think you got everybody hungry here.
Well,
awesome. This was a great discussion. I want to thank you so much for taking the time. I hope this was fun for you as well as our audience. Please be sure to catch Chris hosting a live stream Q&A from you, the audience, about everything you want to know regarding services. That's going to be tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We're also going to have an on-demand training session available for those of you that registered for the training day. So, Chris, thanks again. And on behalf of Redis Labs, thank you all for watching and enjoy the rest of RedisConf. Cheers.
Thanks. It was fun.